The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will
Order. Order. Nick Fletcher to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered E-petition 623390 relating to suicide prevention and the national curriculum. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, Mr Stringer. I first want to thank the petitioners, the Three Dads Walking, for their brilliant campaign. I know they're here today. I also want to thank Papyrus, the charity leading the prevention of young suicide in the UK, for the work they do and the support they have given to Three Dads Walking. I know that this is something that they would have never thought they would have been involved with or even wanted to. But sadly, each, along with their families, have suffered immensely through the loss of their daughters. And if there is something good that can come out of three such tragedies, then we in this place must do all we can to help. Let me first speak of the three dads and their daughters. Tim and his daughter Emily from Norfolk. Emily was 19 and took her life in March 2020. Emily was the life and soul of every room, meeting and party, a free spirit and a talented artist. Emily had struggled for some time and the late diagnosis of autism had not helped. She couldn't cope with life under lockdown and attempted to take her life. She sadly died 5 days later. Andy and his daughter Sophie from Cumbria. Sophie took her life just before Christmas in 2018. She was 29. Sophie was an open, happy young lady with a wide circle of friends who brought a smile and sense of fun to everyone she met. No one had an inkling Sophie was feeling suicidal. Everyone said she seemed like normal Sophie. If she had felt able to share emotions, everyone would have helped, but sadly, she didn't. Mike and his daughter Beth from South Manchester. Beth was 17 and died in March 2020. Beth was a leader, including being the head girl at her primary school. She was outgoing, independent, and an artist with a record contract. Not one single person saw this coming, her dad Mike says. If only she had known about the many charities, maybe she would still be alive. 3 tragic stories, 3 brave dads. Three brave dads who came together to set off on walks to raise over £1 million for prize, and their Hope Link UK helpline and text service who are providing much needed support for our young people. But what is more important is they have raised the awareness of a subject that is sadly affecting so many families across the country. I am very fortunate to be able to stand and lead debates in this place, and I hope many are watching. When leading these debates, I like not only to ask the government what the petitioners have requested, which I will come on to, but I like also to use my time to speak directly to the public. Hopefully, I can pass on the information that I have learnt in my research and in my position as a Member of Parliament. I therefore want to start by sharing some guidance when talking of this subject. The first message is we never say commit when we're speaking of suicide. This is an out-of-date term for people taking their own lives, and one we should refrain from using. People do not commit a crime when they take their own life. They are obviously in a place of deep unhappiness, and their memory should not be tarnished by poor language. They took their own life or have died by suicide. Let us all try and remember that today. There are many great charities working hard to end suicide. As well as Papyrus, there is the Samaritans, James's Place, Mind, Calm, Mates in Mind, Baton of Hope, and many others who do such great work in this field. We should, in this place, pay tribute to them all. The Samaritans have helpfully produced some basic rules when discussing or reporting suicide. We should all take note. These include, we should not report the method or sensationalise this act. We should not refer to a site or a location. And we should avoid excessive amount of coverage and or speculation in the media or on social media. These are really helpful tips that may just prevent someone taking their own life. I would recommend the information on their website and also their excellent Small Talk Saves Lives campaign. Let me now look at what Andy, Tim and Mike, Papyrus and the 160,000 people who signed their petition are asking for. This is to ensure suicide and self-harm awareness is included in the national curriculum, specifically in the relationship, sex and health education curriculum, and that it should be age appropriate. Obviously, our three dads have a specific interest here because they have suffered their individual tragic loss. But their main reason is to help other families and young people and stop the single biggest killer of our young people.
Thank him for giving way, and he's making a very important speech about this subject. It is not talked about often enough, and my constituents got in touch with me about their son Peter, who sadly took his own life in 2012, and they're clear that there has to be more information about suicide and suicide prevention in schools. And I know Scotland has a different curriculum, but I think this is something that certainly we can work on a cross-party basis to achieve across the UK.
Nick Fletcher.
Well, thank you for the honourable friend's interruption there. My condolences go to Peter's family, and I'm sure this is something that we want across the entire of the UK. But that's right, it is the single biggest killer of young people. The figures are very difficult to swallow. The latest ONS figures show that in the period between April 2020 and March 2021, 157 young men and 72 young women between the ages of 10 and 19 took their own life. This cannot be right, can it? I was, at least until my time in this place, one of the many that thought talking about self-harm and suicide was not a good idea. Putting thoughts into young people's minds by discussing this issue openly will only make it worse. However, the many professionals and charities I have spoken to disagree, and a literature review conducted by Cambridge University showed there is no research to prove this to be true. Children are exposed to so much on their phones that they need the tools to deal and help with this subject. An appropriate curriculum taught well could do just that. We do also need to think and act maturely and responsibly on this, though. If we do see that by discussing this, an unintended consequence is that suicide rates amongst young people do increase, then we must be prepared to think again. The professionals I spoke to are all agreed that this subject should be included in the curriculum. They also agreed that Year 7 and upwards was the best time to start. They further agreed it should not be discussed just in 1 year of secondary school, which I believe some schools already do, but it should form part of each academic year for 11 to 12-year-olds upwards. For those who are younger, this subject should not necessarily be broached, but the message to them should be that they have the right to be and to feel safe. There should be no secrets, and nothing should be kept from parents on this matter or any other. They said that ideally this should be taught by external providers who are specialists in this subject, and that each session there should be a follow-up session to talk to any children who are concerned. They also said that both parents and teachers should be trained on how to deal with children who are struggling, and also on how to better spot any signs that something might be wrong and be proactive in conversations. We cannot place the responsibility on the shoulders of our young boys and girls to come forward and talk. It is our responsibility, in fact, our duty to keep our eyes and ears open at all times. Mental health first aid may be one way of doing this. I do have concerns of bringing external providers into school, as I have seen some content on other subjects with regards to RSHE, which is highly inappropriate, and that parents have been kept in the dark on what has been taught. So if we are to use such providers, the content must be shared with parents, and if a parent has concerns, then the parent's voice should be respected. I am sure that the government will take this on board. I was delighted last week to receive a letter for the three dads and I from the Secretary of State of Education. It said that the government will be including suicide prevention as a key priority area in their forthcoming review of RSHE. A move I greatly welcome. This is a real step forward. I am hopeful of a good debate today where we all have one aim, that of stopping our children and our young people taking their own lives. Their lives are so precious. As a dad, my children are my life and my greatest joy. I cannot think of anything worse than losing them. So I ask the Minister, let's do what we can to stop this. I know this is a good government. I know it can and does do good things. Let this be the next good thing this it does. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 623390 relating to suicide prevention and the national curriculum. Can I just sit down a second? Say to honourable members and right honourable members that you need to stand if you want to speak, even if you've written in. And if you haven't written in, please stand, so it will give me and you an idea of how to apportion the time during the debate. Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr Stringer, and it's a pleasure to be here in this debate under your chairmanship. And I want to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Don Valley for introducing the debate on behalf of the Petition Committee. And most of all, I want to start by thanking the three dads. The three dads walking for everything they've done to raise awareness of suicide in young people. I've had the pleasure of meeting Mike, Andy and Tim personally, and I'm delighted that their petition has led to this debate being brought forward this afternoon with an amazing 160,000 petitioners. That is truly amazing. There could not be a more fitting tribute to the lives of Beth, Sophie and Emily than the passion and dedication that they have shown. Thank you. I also want to thank Papyrus for the support that they have given to the three dads and all of the work that they do to tackle young suicide. Mr Stringer, as chair of the APPG on suicide and self-harm prevention, it's been an honour to meet so many inspiring people who, having lost a loved one to suicide, have dedicated so much time and energy to ensuring that other families don't have to go through what they went through. It is, as the three dads say, the club no one wants to join. But many people who have found themselves within it have carried out brilliant work in the face of great adversity. The government must do everything that it can to match their efforts. Now, unfortunately, this is an issue that's touching more and more families. Suicide has recently become the biggest killer of young people under 25, and it's estimated that in an average week, 4 school children will take their own lives. And while young men are 3 times more likely to take their own lives than their female peers, the suicide rate for young women is now at its highest on record. We are getting better and better at tackling the stigma and talking about mental health. But suicide and self-harm is still a taboo subject. People are worried that by talking about suicide, as we've heard, they may say the wrong thing, or worse, that they may encourage it. And this is a particular fear when it comes to talking to children and young people about the issue of suicide. But sadly, this is something which is already in the lives of so many young people. This has been demonstrated by work which has been carried out, for example, on online harms. In recent Samaritans research, with over 5,000 participants, over 3/4 saw self-harm content online for the first time before the age of 14. And there have been several studies that have suggested an association between suicidal ideation and accessing relevant content online. Whilst better online safeguards are a must, we must also equip our young people with the skills and the knowledge to deal with the unique pressures that they're currently facing. It's been my pleasure to work with a local organisation, If You Care Share, an organisation that has been delivering suicide prevention workshops to school pupils across the North East for over 10 years. The charity was founded by the family of Daniel O'Hare, who was just 19 when he took his own life in 2005. Their dedicated team, which includes Daniel's brother Matthew, is primarily made up of young people who have themselves lost a loved one to suicide. This team speak to primary and secondary school children about their own stories and how they can be open about their emotions and their mental health. And research carried out by the charity found that 19% of young people would go to a friend if they needed help, compared to just 6% who would approach someone in their school. Suicide prevention training equips pupils with the skills and confidence to help each other as well as themselves. Now, If You Care Share are one of many fantastic voluntary organisations that are working with young people to prevent suicide. But currently, these organisations are being left to pick up the pieces left over from incapacity in statutory services, and they often rely on short-term grants to carry out their vital work. I'm delighted to be able to say today that If You Care Share have just been awarded funding from the National Lottery to support their Suicide Bereavement Multiple Death Response Programme over 4 years. Multiple deaths refers to a situation in which more deaths occur by suicide than is normally expected in terms of time, place, or both. Sometimes as a result of contagion whereby one person's suicide influences another to engage in suicidal behaviour. Such suicide clusters are a rare event, but schools can be a setting in which they occur. But we must do more to ensure that suicide prevention work is placed on a stable footing. Currently, all funding supporting local areas' core prevention plans is set to cease in 2023-2024. We need continued ring-fenced funding across 3 years to support local areas to deliver targeted, non-clinical support services to prevent suicide. This would allow local authorities to commission long-term services from our best organisations and empower them to support the most at-risk groups. We must also do much more to ensure that children are able to access help when they reach out for it. NHS figures show that children suffering mental health crises spent more than 900,000 hours in A&E last year, and between July 2021 and July 2022, referrals to child and adolescent mental health services increased by 24%. It's so important that we work to prevent suicidal ideation in young people and promote mental well-being. But it's also important that we ensure that there are systems in place to support them in the most acute crises. Putting suicide prevention as an essential part of the curriculum is another step forward to ensuring that there is statutory, long-term support in place for our young people whenever they may need it. But it must be backed up by the funding to ensure that all school pupils are able to access those life-saving workshops, like those delivered by If You Care Share and many other organisations. And it must take the form of sensitive and thought-out content delivered by the people with the experience to make it count. And crucially, it must be built in as part of the curriculum, as the petitioners request, so that every student is supported. Yes?
Thank you. Thank you. May I thank the Honourable Member for her excellent speech, but particularly for the work she's doing as part of the APPG. And may I, in terms of your comments about it being a cross-party issue, it's been mentioned here today that suicide sadly affects many families across the UK, and I'm one of those families following the tragic suicide of my brother. Recently, I launched a campaign to have 100 people on Anglesey trained in mental health first aid. But does my honourable friend agree with me that it's absolutely vital that we talk about mental health, particularly with our young people, so that we can give them the tools to speak about it, but also signpost them to the many fantastic organisations and charities that are there to support? Thank you.
Liz Twist.
I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention, and can I first of all offer my condolences to her in the loss of her brother. I too have been affected by suicide, so have personal experience of that, and I know how important it is to share. And I most certainly agree that it's vital that people talk more about suicide and having difficult suicidal thoughts as well, because we want to prevent suicide rather than to see it continue. So thank you for that. So to conclude, Mr. Stringer, I want to share with you a message from Daniel's family, who often say this. We taught Daniel to tie his shoelaces and how to cross the road safely, but we never spoke to him about how life can throw things at you that you need some help to deal with. It is not a sign of weakness to reach out for help. Just like Daniel's family, our schools teach our young people all about road awareness, about online safety, and many other vital lessons necessary to keep them safe. But today, one of the things that's most likely to take the lives of our young people is our young people themselves. By talking more openly about suicide, we can save more young lives and prevent families like Daniel's and like Beth's, Sophie's and Emily's from going through unimaginable pain. Thank you.
Tracy Crouch.
Thank you, Mrs. Stringer. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And may I take the opportunity to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Don Valley, for his excellent and powerful opening speech. And it is a pleasure is the wrong word. I'm humbled to be following the Honourable Lady for Bladen and all the excellent work that she does on the all-party group. This debate is one I think we all wish, wasn't necessary. Sadly, it is, but I'm relieved that we have a thoughtful and compassionate minister in place who I know will look at this issue in great detail, as he does on many things, and try to come to a speedy decision for the benefit of everyone. I hadn't met them before this debate, but I'd like to pay particular tribute to the Three Dads Walking, who have done a phenomenal amount to raise awareness of this matter. I think we can all agree it is something that no parent ever wants to do, but they have done it with just so much power in terms of bringing that personal story. I'd also like to pay tribute to proprietors who continue to campaign on prevention of young suicide, and other national and local charities who continue to support those with suicidal tendencies and family members who have been left behind. As local MPs, we are often approached by constituents with some of the most tragic and challenging circumstances, and we do our utmost to support them and provide the right advice. However, being approached by a parent whose child has taken their life is utterly heartbreaking, leaving, I suspect, most of us struggling to find the right words of advice and support. I'm sorry to say that I have learned about too many suicides in and around my constituency. Each and every one is a tragedy. each and every one with a unique story, each and every one a life taken too soon. Nationally, the statistics speak for themselves. In 2021, the last date available, 5,583 people took their own life, 3/4 of which were men. While there is a specific concern about middle-aged men, what we are seeing is a worrying increase in the number of school-aged children who take their life, with figures suggesting over 200 a year, something that could and should be reduced with better institutional and individual awareness, as well as a better functioning mental health support system. Today, I wanted to focus on 2 recent lost lives, and I do so with permission from their parents. I want to thank them for having the courage and strength to share their experiences with me, and importantly, their thoughts on what steps they believe are necessary to potentially help prevent other parents and loved ones experiencing the loss of a child. In both cases, they were boys at secondary school. It was just over a year ago that Ryan's body was found. He had gone missing from his home in Eccles, a small, close-knit village that neighbours my own. I found myself quite affected by Ryan's disappearance. He had a connection to the football club my son is at, and the CCTV footage of Ryan on the night he went missing was in my street. I quietly joined others in looking for Ryan and found myself doing regular walks along the river when it became clear that was where the police were focusing their efforts. Ryan's disappearance and subsequent recovery was absolutely heartbreaking for Eccles and for Aylesford. I know his school well, I know of his friends, I know his teachers. When his dad emailed me, it was one of those emails where I just confessed to not knowing what to say. What do you say? What would I want someone to say to me? Ryan was 17. It turns out that he had made a passing comment at school, and while there is certainly no blame cast, it is the view that with better awareness, could something have been done? The following are the words from Ryan's dad. Whilst we will never know why Ryan did what he did, and we will also never know if having suicide spoken about openly at school might have saved him, we are keen to see suicide awareness and prevention in schools progress. If it saves just one person, it will be worth it. Ben Ambrose was 15 when his mum, Catherine, found him lifeless in his bedroom. There is currently a legal case regarding Ben, so I should be careful what I say, but Catherine still feels very let down by the institutional failures within education and mental health services. We met and spoke for a very long time about the deep lack of awareness and understanding of mental health issues in some schools and how their policies and procedures on paper do not necessarily reflect their practices. Catherine is a phenomenal woman in my eyes. Not only is she fighting for Ben with support from Erwin Mitchell, but she wants to help stop this from happening to others. She's very pro-suicide education and awareness, and like me, wants to see more conversations in schools about it. She wants to talk to students about mental health. She wants to be part of the prevention programme. She is not alone. Pre-COVID, I was on the cusp of trialling a few talking sessions in schools with boys about mental health. It was an idea that had come from a Q&A at a local boys' school where mental health was mentioned more than once. It also come from another mum who lost her adult son to suicide, and coincidentally from a man who was keen, having experienced his own brush with suicidal thoughts, wanting to talk to others, particularly young boys, about mental health. COVID scuppered it all, and the plans haven't been revived, in part because it's a scary place to go and talk about these things without qualifications and proper guidance. I get why schools might be nervous about having conversations. I get why ministers might be nervous about allowing them to be had. But I think by working with the right people in the right way, we can create a useful tool that would work. Sadly, as I am discovering, there is no definitive parenting manual out there. There is no guidebook that tells you how to react, or indeed how not to react, when your child is struggling with mental health or starts to self-harm or look at harmful websites. A natural reaction might not be the right reaction. But this is why I truly believe we all need to have better awareness and much more access to support when it comes to mental health, whether that is our own, our friends, or most worryingly, our children. In our formative years, due to the amount of time children spend in education, teachers become incredibly important figures in our lives. I do understand why some have concerns that we are asking our educators to do so much more than teach us maths, English, science, and so on. But if we are to take a more holistic approach to addressing mental health, then they need the right tools and training to do so. If targeted interventions and teaching at the right age can help people identify mental health conditions and suicidal thoughts they, or indeed others, might be experiencing, could this go on to help those suffering there and then, or indeed later on in life? I shall leave the final words to Ryan's dad. The devastating and lasting effect this has had on everybody is very difficult to compare to other bereavement we have experienced. 1 minute our happy and brilliant son is with us, and in the blink of an eye, he has gone. I know the Minister understands how difficult it would have been for those words to have been written. They are hard to speak. They are hard to hear. If there's one thing that Ryan, and Ben, and Emily, and Sophie, and Beth, and many, many others, there's one thing that their tragedies have sparked. It is an awareness of suicide and mental health amongst their peers and teachers. But what we need is for that to remain long after their friends have left school, which is why I support the petition to put suicide prevention on the national curriculum, and I look forward to hearing the Minister's response later.
Mike Kane.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. As ever, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And can I thank the member for Don Valley for bringing this petition to us today. My constituent, Mike Palmer's daughter, Beth, died by suicide on the 28th of March 2020 in the first week of lockdown. She was just 17. She was a talented singer with a vivacious personality, deeply loved by friends and family, a great character who belonged on stage. Indeed, Beth was the last person you would have thought would take her own life. She had so much to live for. Sadly, as the chair of the APG said, this is far too common. Suicide is the biggest killer of under 35s in the UK, with around 200 school children each year taking their own life. Mike felt Beth's loss so acutely, he was plunged into a suicidal spiral himself. This is a complex grief that is left behind for families. The facts show that around 135 people are affected by one suicide, and that those closest to the individual lost are 80 to 300% more likely to take their own lives. However, through this despair, fate was to play a part. Mike was to team up with Tim and Andy, the fathers of two other beautiful young women, Sophie and Emily, also sadly lost to suicide. And so, Three Dads Walking was born. For these men, a simple walk between their homes, raising funds and awareness for the charity Papyrus, which is dedicated to the prevention of young suicide, has turned into a life mission. A mission to prevent other families from going through the same lifelong agony that they are facing. Walking in 2021 and 2022, they covered over 900 miles and were on the road for 46 days. During these walks, Mike, Andy and Tim were joined continuously by other bereaved parents and those affected by suicide. And through conversations with these individuals, the same messages kept coming through. If only our children had known how to reach out and had an awareness of how to keep themselves safe, they might be here now. Three Dads Walking have a belief that if our young people's greatest danger is themselves, then we, as a society, should tell them. We should teach them in an age-appropriate and sensitive way how to keep themselves and others safe.
Honourable friend, give way.
I'll be happy to give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way on that point. It's put on record that many of my constituents of Weaver Vale have been inspired by Three Dads Walking. With that clarion call to ensure that actually is integrated into the curriculum. But there's also greater regulation. That's come from my constituents who've been certainly affected by suicide in their family. Greater regulation of online harm.
Okay.
Can I thank my colleague for that intervention? And I'm sure that the Education Minister who is with us today will have heard that fully. I know him to be an extraordinarily honourable man who takes education of our children very, very seriously, having shadowed him for a number of years in the post previously. Now, we should talk about mental health in schools more, building the awareness and coping mechanisms that will foster more positive mental well-being and resilience in younger people, and helping to lay the foundations that will keep young people safe and reverse the tragically high rates of young suicide. Mike tells me that some of the most powerful stories the three dads hear on their walks are stories from those who have experienced severe mental health episodes, and in some cases have attempted suicide, but who have overcome these struggles and now living happily with full lives. These stories show that hope is always possible, that people, especially with support, can make different choices and overcome the worst mental health struggles. Is this an alternative outcome for families affected by suicide not worth fighting for? Surely, these testimonies demonstrate starkly what is at stake if we do not act, and what we can offer if we do act, providing life-saving knowledge to our young people we can give them and their families an alternative path, a path to hope, a path to a happy and full life for them and their loved ones, a path that everyone deserves. Thank you, Mr.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. It is indeed a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to thank, firstly, my honourable friend, member for Don Valley, for bringing this to the chamber today. I'd also like to thank the petitioners, the three dads over there, Andy, Tim and Mark, who are doing a fantastic job. I'd also like to thank my good friend, Graham Link, who sat over there, who lost his son, Sean, to suicide in December last year. Graham's a brave man. He's a hard man. He's a gentleman. He's an ex-coal miner, same as myself. We've done many a shift down the pit together. One of the bravest men I've ever come across in my life. But this, the loss of his son, has broken him. Sean Link was a brilliant young man. He was 30 years old when he took his life. He was a big, strong, confident, good-looking lad. Handsome man, had his mother's looks, and his mother's brains, I think, Graham. But he was a lovely young man, and when he walked into a room, he lit the room up. Everybody wanted to be around Sean. Everybody liked Sean. We all loved Sean, and I was just drinking with him just a week in the Doghouse pub, a week before he took his own life. Never saw it coming. He was such a lovely young man. His death shocked the whole community and left many of us asking questions, why? We'd sit with him on a weekend, I would, with his mum and dad, swapping old stories about our mining days, and Sean would be sat there laughing and giggling with us, and you would never know that he must have been in pain. He must have been in pain, Sean. Like I say, on the face of it, a happy man, good footballer, loved his sports, loved his family, loved his friends, always surrounded himself with great loving people. There were no signs there, but something must have been wrong. But Sean's dad, Graham, believes that Sean was using the dark web. He was looking at things that probably he should not have looked at. He was looking at things and tapping into this dark, horrible web, which was giving him dark thoughts. But who knows? The police have still got Sean's phone, so we're yet to get to the bottom of that. Now, I know the internet can be a dangerous place, and it can target people with the algorithms and do some horrible stuff and target vulnerable people. But I'm glad to see the online harm bill is going some way to address that. But I think we need to go further. And I will say a big thanks to all these charities and support groups that's around, that's helping young people with these dark thoughts. In my own patch, we have a charity called Enlighten the Shadows. This was set up by a young man called Rory Green, who had some dark thoughts himself. He lost his baby. His partner lost his baby through a miscarriage. He felt hopeless, he felt worthless, he felt like ending it all. And, you know, he was in a really bad, dark and horrible place. But he got through it. And he set up a support group online through Facebook and social media and a website. And he was absolutely astounded by the amount of young men that was contacting him, who'd had dark thoughts, suicidal thoughts. So he reached out. He got some other people on board. They talk to men on a regular basis. And he tells me that they've probably saved about 100 lives so far. And this is by just men talking to men. I know it's a big problem with young ladies as well, young girls, schoolgirls. But the vast majority of suicides that I've come across are young men. And there's no rhyme, no reason for it. But, you know, keeping quiet is not an option. You've got to talk about this. And it's all well and good telling people they must talk, but they have to have somebody to talk to. And at the moment, it can be very difficult from some of the poorer families in the more deprived areas, because a lot come from broken families, etc. So they've not always got that great family support and people to talk to. But make no mistake, this is an epidemic, but it's not a means-tested epidemic. It doesn't matter you're rich or poor, successful or unsuccessful, whether you come from a council estate or a country estate. You know, this goes for anybody. This can affect anybody in all walks of life. So, you know, big shout out for Rory and his group for doing this sort of great work. But what I will say is that probably everybody in this room has been affected by suicide. If you go back far, I know my family's been affected, and but like I say, we don't talk about it. I travelled down with Graham this morning, and we had a long conversation. And what probably as MPs don't see is, you know, inside our friends' heads, their minds, and what goes off. Graham goes to bed every night. He thinks about his son. And he thinks about his son with a rope around his neck. And that's what goes through his mind. And I can't get my head around that. For a man to watch a little boy from a baby grow up, be his pride and joy, and to take his life in that way. And Graham feels broken, he probably feels guilty, and he feels hopeless. But I'm here to tell Graham today that he's none of those things. He's not guilty, and he's not hopeless, because Graham's working with this charity, and he's going to raise thousands of pounds for the Enlighten the Shadows suicide charity. He's going to cycle 1,000 miles in 10 days. He's doing some running as well. He's got the support of the whole community. And Graham wholeheartedly supports the idea of putting this on the school curriculum and helping people and getting people to talk, to save some lives. So I guess what I'd say to the Minister, Mr Stringer, is please look at these families over here. These are broken people. And we need to see less of these families come into this place. We need to intervene. We need to get this on the school curriculum, and we need to save lives. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Rachel Mascon.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. It's humbling to be called in today's debate. Every step breaks taboos. Every mile tells a story. Every day, hearts are joined in grief and healing as sons and daughters are mourned and celebrated. But the void that they have left is beckoning not only questions but answers. As three dads are traversing our nation, they are tearing down stigma of suicide that too many are wrestling with. They are creating safe spaces to talk. They are ensuring that Sophie, Emily and Beth are heard. And they have brought us to this place through their petition to seek change. Andy, Tim and Mike, we're indebted to you. Today, it's their pleas that must be heard, and I sincerely thank them for all they're doing. Having had the privilege of meeting last week, I know how much this debate means to them, and I'm sure that the Minister and Shadow Minister will not only listen, but advance their calls. Their mission, to reduce the number of young people who take their own lives by shattering the stigma surrounding suicide and equipping young people and their communities with the skills to recognise and respond to emotional distress. Across our nation, people are struggling with their mental health, and let's be honest, we all do, in different ways at different times. For some, the night passes quickly, while others spiral into a dark and enduring place, where the echoes of despair resonate louder than any hope. Papyrus, and I sincerely thank them for their work, knows better than anyone the scale. Our mental health services cannot cope. CAMS are struggling, and with mental health receiving just 8.6% of the health budget, there is no parity of esteem to speak of. But we know that with early intervention, all but a few would ever need to call on the NHS for care. This is the call from this debate. Young people talk extensively about mental health, but when the moment gets hard, in the silences, it is a toxicity of TikTok that is sucking them into the algorithms of despair, drawing them to make the wrong choices. From self-harm to suicide, children are accessing content that takes them down some very dangerous paths. So as adults, parents, teachers, youth workers and politicians, let's acknowledge this and let's take the necessary steps to keep our young people safe. As we've heard, suicide is the biggest killer of under 35s in our country, with over 200 school-aged children taken every year. I'm happy to give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I thank my Honourable friend, the Member for Don Valley, for bringing this very important debate. And as my Honourable friend, the Member for Ashfield, was saying, the internet has some dark places. And surely in schools we must be warning about online harms, but also we must make those platforms take more responsibility. I welcome the online harms bill, but is it not the platforms we should also be addressing on this?
Rachel Muskell.
I thank the Honourable Member for making that intervention, because he's absolutely right. The online space continues to be unsafe for too many people, and there is so much more that needs to be done in our understanding of the new initiatives online, but also in ensuring that everyone can be safe online at all times. In returning to numbers, and of course we're not talking about numbers, we're talking about people, people struggling. The ONS reported that there are 5,583 suicides registered in England and Wales just last year, almost a ratio of 2 to 1 men to women. And of course, it's the young people that we often think about. So young people need the skills and resilience to manage the very worst of their emotions. We know that talking is powerful, but without education of young people in knowing who to talk to and how to talk to them, and parents and teachers actively reaching out, we are leaving our young people in danger. We need a greater therapeutic approach to our education system. We locked up our young people through COVID, and it's proved tougher than anyone could have imagined. A generation is really struggling. They don't need brutal academic stress and harsh disciplinary regimes such as I've been discussing this morning at a local school. The behaviour in schools guidance needs serious revision too. The need for talking is there before us. Who can help them work through their anxieties, their stresses and their depression? They need space to explore and explain. Mums and dads need tools and skills to support and listen. Teachers need help too. They need their training to talk about suicide. We cannot shy away or soften the words, for suicide is real. And at this time, adults also need to catch up with the young people and recognise that. As politicians, we can't be squeamish or in denial, because we are losing our sons and daughters, and sadly, mums and dads too. Life is really tough. People haven't got enough money. Home is not always a safe place, and some young people carry a heavy weight. Life never turns out as you hoped it to be. Bullying is rife, loneliness epidemic, toxic social media, ever judging and tormenting. And yet we don't talk about suicide when that starts playing on the mind of its victims. So, Minister, it's time to teach and it's time to talk. Every child in every school. We start with the teachers. They need government backing. Every teacher trained so that they are ready to talk to their students, whatever age or context, knowing how to check in and reach out, as well as guide and care. Every school a safe place for parents to learn, to ask those questions that are never aired, for we cannot hear the cries of why didn't anyone tell us anymore? And then every child. For younger children, it's mental health first aid, having safe conversations when you feel sad. But as the years grow, children need to know who to talk to, how to talk, and how to keep themselves safe. If we do not talk about suicide, it will find them. But if they are taught resilience, then they will have the skills for life that they need to stay safe and well. The pilgrimage of Tim, Andy, and Mike has brought them to this place, to the minister's door. They're not here to beg or plead, because for them, this has come too late. But they are here to tell of what it means to lose their beautiful daughters, and how the tears of other parents need never be shed. This will probably be the most important debate of the minister's time in this place. It is time to open the door, to open minds and open hearts. Let's listen and learn and ensure that all is done to keep our young people safe. It is time for walking to turn to time for talking.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, I want to thank my honourable friend, the member for Don Valley, for bringing such an important debate and leading it here today on the introducing of statutory suicide prevention teaching in our current RSHE curriculum. I think there's been many powerful contributions, but none more powerful than having three dads walking actually here in the chamber this afternoon with us. So may I also thank Mike, Tim and Andy for their incredible work on this campaign. Mr Owen is a fellow Norfolk man, not from my constituency, but it is a great privilege to represent our county for him this afternoon, along with my colleague from North West Norfolk, also sitting beside me. Their efforts clearly have not gone unnoticed, and the huge impact that this will have on children and young people in the future is hugely significant. To those in my own constituency, in particular the many mental health campaigners that I speak to, but also Carolyn Aldridge, who I know will watch this, she has done so much for others. She has lost her own son due to mental illness, but also the many others who I've spoken to in the past who have told me about their personal experiences on the tragedy of losing a child to suicide. I'm honoured to participate in this debate today on their behalf.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I will certainly give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I join him in paying tribute to three dads, including Tim, who, as he says, is from West Norfolk, for raising money, but vitally for raising awareness of this issue, getting us talking about it today, raising awareness of the support that does exist. But would my honourable friend agree with me that it's vital that the review the government has rightly committed to, and which I welcome, and I know my honourable friend the Minister will look very carefully, hears directly from three dads walking and from others who've been directly affected by suicide to inform this decision.
Duncan Baker.
Well, I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. It is absolutely inherent that those with personal experience can help shape any future review and legislation that comes forward about this, and I would agree entirely with my honourable member and colleague. Mental health and mental health illness is personal, and yet it's an often isolating journey. And despite the increased openness of conversation on an issue that affects 1 in 4 of us throughout our lifetimes, early intervention can make an astounding difference to the lives of those suffering, especially for our children and young people. Now, in researching for this debate, I was devastated to learn that between 1 in 6 children aged 5 to 16 were identified as having a probable mental health problem in July 2020, and those numbers have probably only risen since. But moreover, a survey by Young Minds found that suicide rates for young people aged 15 to 19 rose by a third between 2020 to 2021, from 147 to 198. And yet, despite these staggering figures, around 70% of children and adolescents do not get appropriate interventions at early enough age. And it begs the question how we can begin to overcome this. Well, I believe, like many members have said this afternoon, one of the answers is implementing this within our national curriculum. Since September 2020, RSHE have been a statutory part of the curriculum, yet suicide prevention taught in a safe and age-appropriate way is only optional. Although I am pleased that the government too sees the incredible value in supporting mental health, I do believe that a review of the RSHE curriculum is the right step to providing consistent mental health support across all schools nationally. To introduce statutory suicide prevention teaching within schools would not only target the group most affected by suicide, that we've heard many times this afternoon is our under 35s, but also make it so that our children and our young people are equipped as they move into adulthood. According to research, 1 in 3 mental health problems in adults are attributed to childhood experiences, with higher rates of depression, suicidal thoughts, and anxiety disorders presenting in later life. By educating our children on mental health, it surely will only serve to benefit them later. Moreover, mental health teaching within structured school lessons will have incredible benefits on early intervention, preventing suicide, and as many have said, also normalising mental health and encouraging conversations with support systems, whether that be parents, teachers, or external agencies, such as MIND or Papyrus. Furthermore, following the key principles, those 3 key principles from Papyrus, support, equip and influence, where better to start than in the classroom. Teaching, of course, should be preventative and extra care should be taken to signpost a source of support. However, promoting positive mental health in schools and putting in place support, including working with external bodies, is a positive way forward. I've always had the belief that in schools we should have mental health first aiders trained with their staff, because the suicide figures that we are seeing today and have spoken about are frankly too high. The wider support that there is to prevent suicide prevention teaching in schools, I think, should be considered in implementing. To end, Mr. Chairman, supplying consistent mental health teaching across all schools nationally is a necessity. Although the government has in the past said it will be taking forward proposals to train designated senior leads for mental health in schools by 2025 and fund mental health awareness training, the review for RSHE curriculum to include suicide prevention should continue to be a priority of this government, and I think it should be brought in as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Abrams.
So much, Mr. Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and also if I could congratulate the member for Don Valley for his success in his debate. But particularly I'd like to pay tribute to Andy Airy, Mike Palmer and Tim Owen, who collectively we know is the 3 dads walking. I think my honourable friend, the member for Bladeham, summed it up brilliantly. There could be no greater tribute to your beautiful girls than the work you're doing in raising awareness, in the fundraising that you've done as well, and finally getting this petition. I also agree with my honourable friend, the member for City of York, York Central, that the Minister will probably not attend a more important debate in his career. We've heard already of the personal stories of people who've been affected by suicide, and I think we will be hearing more as the debate proceeds. I fully support the proposals that have been set out in this petition to make suicide prevention a compulsory part of the school curriculum. And again, I think my honourable friend raised such an important point. It's converting walking to talking. I think that's we should bottle that particular phrase. It sums up really where we need to go. We know that 90% of suicides are associated with mental health issues, but that 75% of people who take their own life have had no prior contact with mental health services. So the earlier children and young people are aware of and understand their feelings, but also where to access health services when they need them, the better. I'd like to raise a few more points, if I may, Mr. Stringer. Specifically in relation to the deaths by suicide in 2021. 5,583 people died by suicide.
The honourable member give way for a moment of time. The honourable member from Saddleworth is making a very powerful intervention, particularly in light, Mr Stringer, of an excellent health service background long before she came to this chamber, and I hope that I've stood on my feet long enough now so that I can bring her back into the debate.
My honourable friend is very kind, and I do thank him. So, unfortunately, our much-loved 20-year-old nephew, Jack, died when he took his life. Jack was a lot younger than his 11 cousins and was doted on by all. At our regular Sunday morning breakfast, he would be in the centre of the room, laughing at someone's joke or telling everybody about the week that he'd had at school. He was gentle, bright, and kind. We are a very large family. My husband's the eldest of 7. We all have children. And, of course, Jack's mum was John's baby sister. But we were a very close one. And 90 months on from his death, a month after his inquest, to say we're all still devastated would be no exaggeration. This is absolutely nothing compared to the heartbreak his mum is still going through. She's given me her permission to speak about the context of Jack's suicide in the hope that it may help others. At 17, without Jack's mum's knowledge, Jack was prescribed with Roaccutane. Roaccutane is the trade name for isotretinoin, a prescribed medicine for severe acne, and has been available in the UK since 1983. It was also approved for the use in the USA under the trade name Accutane in 1982. However, in July 2009, following the filing of thousands of lawsuits where Accutane use was said to be associated with severe life-changing health problems, both physical and psychological, in some cases many years after Accutane use, it was withdrawn from sale in the US. In November 2020, the UK's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Authority announced that the Commission on Human Medicines had established an isotretinoin expert working group. This evidence was reviewed this evidence review was prompted when the highest levels of fatalities associated with Roaccutane use was recorded in 2019 via the MHRA's Yellow Card reporting scheme. An online portal for reporting adverse drug reactions is the way that this happens. In total, 12 fatalities were reported in 2019, 10 by suicide, 85 serious incidents, and 19 non-serious ones. At Jack's inquest last month, the coroner requested that the MHRA present evidence about the review's findings. The scandal is the review had been completed at the end of 2021, but the findings and recommendation hadn't been published because of, and I quote from my notes, complications associated with Brexit. It transpired that the recommendations, which 15 months on still haven't been published, included requiring 2 doctors to agree to Roaccutane being prescribed to under-18s. And only after all other acne treatments have been tried. It is a serious drug. It is a serious and needs to be so closely monitored. The MHRA representative attending the inquest revealed that since the completion of the review in 2021, there have been a further 81 adverse psychiatric events, including 1 suicide and 1 attempted suicide. On this issue, the family were pleased that the coroner had issued a Prevention of Futures death report to the Health and Social Care Secretary, and the family looks forward to his early response and the publication of the 2021 review on isotretinoin. However, we believe that there needs to be an immediate awareness of the dangers of this group of drugs so that more of our young people and their families don't go through what we've been through. The family also wanted to raise issues about the suicides of university students. Every year, 3 students per 100,000 will take their own life. Despite the university's UK Suicide Safer Universities guidelines,
There does seem to be an ad hoc approach in terms of how this is implemented. Just prior to his death, Jack had been a first-year student at the University of York. In March 2020, he expressed concerns about his mental health to his departmental support officer. But although Jack was signposted to mental health support, this wasn't followed through. What Jack displayed was more or less word for word what was in the university's UK section on recognising signs and vulnerabilities. But it wasn't responded to as such, and it certainly wasn't flagged centrally. We believe that at registration, universities should get students to identify an individual, parent, guardian, or a named advocate for university staff to get in touch with if they have health concerns about a student. We also believe there needs to be training of all university staff regarding suicide prevention. I'd like at this stage also to pay tribute to the work that Papyrus has done around awareness training, and particularly the campaign around Spot the Signs, and similarly to the Samaritans training. This needs to be widespread, not just within schools, but within higher education institutions as well. There isn't an understanding of what these signs and symptoms are. We will never know exactly why our Jack took his life. We miss him every day. We want to do all we can to prevent others from feeling suicide as their only way out of the pain that they feel, because it isn't. Thank you.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, and I just want to pay tribute to my honourable friend from Oldham East and Saddleworth. That was clearly not an easy speech to make, and coming from a large family too, I think I'm up to about 20 nephews, nieces, great-nephews, nieces, even the children are having children now. You know, I cannot begin to imagine what it would be like if one of those sadly went down the same route as Jack, and it was incredibly brave, and I understand the compulsion, having spoken in a debate last year after the death of one of my very close friends by suicide. You know, you sort of feel so powerless when it happens, but at the same time you sort of think, well, by speaking up and using what you powers you do have in this place to try to draw attention to it, you're at least doing something that will help others. I do just want to, before getting on to the main thrust of my speech, just pick up on a couple of things that she mentioned, because I too attended my friend's inquest, and there was a prevention of future death notices published, and I did quite a lot of digging around beforehand as to what was going to happen at the inquest. There's an issue about how long these things take to, and actually he did end up having a fairly quick hearing, but some cases take a very long time to get to that stage. And also it's not entirely clear what happens when these notices are issued. And I asked some parliamentary questions trying to, it's one thing a coroner issuing a notice, but does it just end up going in a big pile, and is action actually taken? Are there efforts made to make sure that the lessons really have been learned? The other thing that I would pick up on is what she had to say about university students, and very sadly Bristol did have a spate of, Bristol University had a spate of suicide. So again, it was very much sort of drawn to my attention because of that. And this issue, and it also came up when I did an event last year with the Band New Order, actually, where we were talking with CALM, the suicide prevention charity. And one of the things that came through was this, in some cases, universities don't feel that they can talk to the parents about, because the children are classed as adults, and even though there are signs of distress, they sort of feel that they can't go back. And that need for a named adult, so that it's dealt with at registration, so that they feel that they can access, you know, make sure the parents know what's going on is really important. And again, there were a few cases where that hadn't been, that hadn't happened. So moving on from that, I mean, in some cases, as we've heard, there are very few signs of children. Yeah, it can really take families by, you know, just sudden incidents when they weren't aware that the young people in question or the children had mental health problems. But we do know that there are also a record number of children whose mental health problems are known, and they're on the NHS mental health waiting list, and we know that situations worsening rapidly, in part because of the pressures on children because of COVID and the years of lockdown. NHS stats from November last year revealed that 1 in 6 children aged between 7 and 16 show signs of a probable mental health condition, and that jumps to 1 in 4 amongst young people aged 17 to 19. We know that half of all mental health problems are established by the age of 14, so there's an imperative to ensure that today's school pupils don't end up as tomorrow's suicide statistics, whether that, that's when they're still young people or whether it's, as in my friend's case, 30, 40 years down the line. I asked Prime Minister's questions recently about adverse childhood experiences, and the Prime Minister, I think he just heard the words children and mental health and replied about what mental health support was available rather than actually addressing my questions. So I don't particularly blame him for it, but what I was asking about is how you prevent children reaching a stage where in their mental health crisis because of things that are going on in their life. We need to address not just the consequences, but also the causes of poor mental health in children, and ideally prevent those causes, those adverse childhood experiences happening in the first place. So, I do entirely support calls to talk more about mental health. I encourage children to seek support if they're struggling, and for teachers and other professionals to try to identify whether children are in that place. But it shouldn't just be about helping children cope. It should be about trying to ensure that children are happy and healthy right from the word go, and whether that's trying to stop things like online harms, whether it's about dealing with problems at home, including parents who might themselves not be getting the help that they need, which obviously can have an impact on their children, or any of the other factors that we know that lead to children feeling in a dark place. Any strategy has to include that too. We know that about 4 children, as has been said, 4 children a week, 200 a year, lose their lives to suicide every year. And I do want to commend the work that 3 Dads Walking have done to draw attention to this issue and what they're doing with the charity Every Life Matters. Again, going back to what I said at the start, I can see that they feel that this is the least that they can do, and I really hope that we can do justice to them today and the Minister can show them that something will come of all their efforts. I also commend Papyrus and other charities for the work that they're doing. In Bristol, the council published its updated suicide prevention plan last August, and one of the 7 points of action is about targeting mental health among specific groups, including children and young people, and that includes providing mental health first aid, something called Safe Talk, and self-harm training to school mental health leads, and I'm sure we'll hear more from the Shadow Schools Minister about Labour's plans for mental health professionals in every school when he comes to respond. There's also a suicide pack produced in Bristol and a self-harm toolkit, so these sort of practical resources. And quite a few local charities have been mentioned. In Bristol, it's Off the Record that works mostly with young people, offering them outreach, mental health workshops, one-to-one counselling and so on. I just want to say a little bit about how this will be done, and I think people have already flagged up that this needs to be done, and any sort of education in schools needs to be done in a very sensitive and age-appropriate way. One concern I have is perhaps if you're just talking generally to a group of children who are in a reasonably good place, that sort of group conversation might be fine. If a child is already in a dark place, I'm not entirely sure that this is the best way of reaching out to them. And I'm not sure how, particularly if a child's introverted, has gone inside themselves. So that would be a question, I guess, for the professionals, but that's something I wanted to flag up. The other is,
paying tribute to the 3 Dads Walking and for everyone who's campaigned on this issue, and I think we've heard from across the whole chamber the very strong support there is for doing more. Would she agree it's very important to work with the experts on this in making sure that any curriculum materials are properly sourced and age appropriate, and that what we've seen elsewhere in the RSHE curriculum is a big backlash and concern from parents where they feel that might not be the case. So if this is to be done, it needs to be done very well, and organisations such as Papyrus, Calm, that she's mentioned, can play a very important part in informing that.
And I think that's absolutely right, and it's always difficult to. We always talk about the value of tailoring things to the individual, you know, whether it's job seeking or whether it's health support or whatever. And that can be difficult when resources are tight. And I would make a plea that we do need those teaching assistants and extra staff in schools so that they can spot, you know, children, get to know the children and learn their individual characteristics. And one thing I wanted to flag up is where neurodiversity is an issue, because we already know that children mature at different ages, so what's age appropriate can be quite difficult. But and I'm speaking from personal experience of one case where a child was actually at mainstream secondary school, but was so distressed and alarmed by what she was being taught about drugs and crime and gangs and things, that actually ended up with full-blown mental health crisis, ended up in residential provision where she was diagnosed with autism. And that's just one example, and then she ended up in special school, but because that was a safer environment for her. But that's just one example of how being taught about something would be different for a child. And also some of the therapies that are available, like CBT, for somebody with an autism diagnosis, the mind just doesn't work in that sort of way. So that's something else that I'd flag up. When the SEND review was published last year, it was jointly authored by the Health Secretary and the Education Secretary, but there was very little really about the overlap with CAMS. And I know the Minister's not here to speak for the Health Department today, but I think the role of CAMS is absolutely crucial in this. The other point I'd flag up is what support is provided once lessons are over, and that individual one-to-one support. So I will end on that. I don't know what's happened to the suicide prevention strategy. I hope that we see that. I was told that it was imminent when I did my Westminster Hall debate last year, but I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say.
Stephanie Peacock.
Pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mr Stringer, and to follow the many thoughtful, heartfelt and in some cases difficult speeches today. I'd like to begin by paying tribute to the families here who joined us today for their powerful campaign, Three Dads Walking, for all their work raising awareness. My constituency of Barnsley East has the highest level of children, adolescents and young adults admitted to hospital for self-harm in Yorkshire and the Humber. For every 100,000 young people, 638 are admitted, almost 1.5 times the national average. Child and adolescent mental health services are at breaking point. Wait times for treatment are months and sometimes years, and local mental health charities simply can't get the funding required to treat the people who are falling through the gaps for NHS treatment. We have a number of charities locally who are working hard with young people. Hay, for example, who came to Parliament last year to meet with the Health Minister, as well as Samaritans, who both support young people experiencing suicidal thoughts across Barnsley. My office is regularly contacted by desperate parents who aren't sure how to help their children through mental health crises and are terrified that self-harm will progress to suicide. Last year, one Barnsley mother contacted me about her child who had been diagnosed with ADHD and had a very low mood, including suicidal thoughts. After awaiting a year for treatment, it was delayed further as there was a debate about where his treatment should take place. Due to the fact his school was in Rotherham, he was told he must have his treatment there despite living in Barnsley. This resulted in him being removed from his current waiting list and placed on another one, which had a wait time of a further 12 months. His mother was desperate and terrified that a longer wait for her son's treatment could lead to his mental health deteriorating to the lowest point possible. Following an intervention from my office, a decision was taken to start his treatment in Rotherham, but it shouldn't have taken that. All this may seem overly bureaucratic, but it is driven by low budgets and an inability to manage waiting lists where demand outstrips services by a huge margin. Mum says her son is doing much better since starting treatment, which is of course very welcome news, but is it unacceptable that due to a lengthy waiting list he was allowed to sink so low for so long before he was given the help he was needed? Another one of my constituents was suffering from depression and severe anxiety, missing a lot of school and occasionally self-harming. She had to wait over 6 months for an appointment with CAMS, during which time her schoolwork suffered and she was put into lower sets for key subjects. Following her initial appointment, she then had to wait a further 3 months to even start treatment. At the time, she was studying for her GCSEs, a vital time in any young person's life, and one where life chances can easily be decreased due to a lack of timely and effective treatment. These are just 2 examples of the many who have been in touch, and sadly, they are not unusual. Well, the government needs an urgent plan to look and deal with this crisis, and I echo the words made by the member for York that this will be the most important debate that the Minister will take part in. Teaching children and young people about good mental health and their resilience from a young age will be hugely beneficial in helping them to grow up, to be aware of their feelings and the pressures that surround them. Life for the average teenager has changed beyond recognition in the last generation with the advent of social media, but of course other pressures at home and people dealing with lack of money and poverty. We must keep up with these changes if we are to ensure that young people are given the best chances and the best skills to navigate the extra pressures that they face today. However, if we are to put this extra responsibility of support onto schools and to teachers, there must be a plan of action to accompany it. The answer to the mental health crisis is not to put more work onto teachers and support staff. As a former state school teacher, I know that staff are already struggling to find resources for the same and in some cases less pay. We need a wide-ranging approach. A review of the RSHE curriculum must take on the board the views of experts on how to add worthwhile, appropriate content into the school syllabus that has a positive and educational impact for all young people. As someone who has taught RSHE in school, I can see the benefit and I would welcome the change. Adding suicide prevention onto the school curriculum is an important step in the right direction. We must learn the lessons from this mental health crisis and use all the possible ways to safely equip the next generation of children as they navigate their way of life towards adulthood.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. It's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship, and thank you very much for affording me the opportunity to speak today. It's a privilege to follow the honourable members who have made such powerful speeches today. I thank the Petitions Committee for hosting this debate. And first of all, I'd like to pay a personal tribute to the three dads walking, my constituent, Andy Airy, Tim Owen and Mike Palmer, for their tireless, selfless campaigning to see suicide awareness a compulsory part of the school curriculum. As we have all heard, and we're very aware of their campaign, Andy, Tim and Mike tragically each lost their precious daughters, Sophie, Emily and Beth, to suicide. It is humbling for us all to be here today to support them in their campaign as they have bravely turned their personal tragedy towards positive change to help other people. It was a privilege to join them on their walk as they came through Penrith. Their petition has been amazing, as we've seen testament today, with around 159,000 signatures. Their fundraising, I lose track of it, but it is over £1 million, and congratulations to them all. I likewise want to thank all those who work with people young and old to protect and support their mental health in my constituency and right across the country, in the NHS, in charities such as Papyrus, Mind, the Samaritans and Every Life Matters. I am passionate, Mr. Chair, about parity of esteem between mental and physical health, and I have mentioned that since my maiden speech here. I welcome the progress that has been made so far on suicide awareness since the Conservatives came into power. The National Suicide Prevention Strategy in 2012, the Cross-Government Suicide Prevention Work Plan in 2019, and I welcome that this is being backed up by funding, such as £150 million for mental health facilities, including supporting a mental health crisis centre in the Carlton Clinic in Carlisle. This is all vital for ensuring that mental health crises are handled by the most appropriate people to provide the most appropriate care for their needs. But we are all here today to press for more preventative measures, to try and avoid crisis and ultimately to avoid catastrophe. Today shows the issue of mental health has shown the work of this House at its very best, showing unity across the House to address this important issue of mental health. This unity of the House is very clear with the early day motion that I was humbled to introduce on behalf of the three dads last year, calling for suicide prevention and mental health first aid in educational settings, signed by 41 members from right across the House. This has been also recognised by our Prime Minister, and I look forward to taking this forward when the three dads and I together meet with the Prime Minister in the meeting that I secured for them recently. But why do we need this change? Well, the evidence is clear, and we've heard this today, that this is a crisis amongst our young people and we need to take action. As Andy, Tim and Mike have highlighted at the heart of their campaigning, the reality is that suicide, very tragically, is the biggest killer of under 35s in the UK. As we have heard, On average, over 5 young people take their lives each day, and over 200 school children lost to suicide every year. The majority are teenagers, but some are primary-age children. Now, the data are unclear, and perhaps it's due to the way that deaths by suicide are interpreted and recorded. Now, the government has long recognised the crucial tool of education, ensuring that our young people are fully equipped to deal with the realities of the wider world. The government's action to make relationships and sex education and health education mandatory in schools is an important commitment to our young people and their well-being. But this commitment can only benefit our young people if every young person, consistently right across the country, is equipped to tackle every serious issue that may well affect their well-being. At the moment, there is a disparity. We currently equip our young people to tackle relationships, drugs, alcohol, and other problems that may threaten their well-being, but we do not consistently provide our young people with the tools in their arsenal to tackle this biggest threat of suicide. While I appreciate the government provides guidance on mental health as part of its statutory guidance, making suicide awareness a compulsory part of the school curriculum would do something even more fundamental. The change would fundamentally reinforce to our young people that your mental health and your physical health are equally important. They need equal care and protection and are of equal parity of esteem in the eyes of wider society. Ultimately, this will help break down any stigma that many people face with their mental health, providing the same ability to discuss it openly and honestly as we would do with other aspects of our well-being. But we must ensure that proper support for young people in all stages of education, as we have heard, such as university and college, where the unique environment and often being away from family and friends can be an exciting journey for the majority, but very challenging for others. I do declare, Mr. Chair, an interest that in my career in higher education, I've had mental health first aid training and also assist applied suicide intervention skills training. The huge take-home that I took from that training is that we must not tiptoe around this subject. We must address it directly, but in a very sensitive way. I can say from my personal experience, I have applied this training. In one person that I was liaising with, the sense of relief when I actually addressed the subject with them, this person, it welled up in them, and they just said to me, "Oh my goodness, Neil, thank you. You understand." And that was a real lesson to me that we can't tiptoe around this subject. This training does not make you an expert. It doesn't make you a consultant in mental health. But what it does, it gives you the tools to help talk to people and signpost them to the help that they need. So accordingly, I'm very strongly supportive, as I've heard from members today, of the concept of mental health first aid training. And in addition to the petition aim of suicide awareness and prevention into the school curriculum, I would welcome the government looking at expanding mental health first aid into all educational settings more widely. It is important.
One of the issues is that at the moment it is not a standard provision, and quite often it is employed by people after a tragic event. We had a recent incident of a young man associated with Aylesford Football Club who took his own life. And as a consequence, the football club itself has reached out and become mental health first aid trainers. But it was unfortunate that it took that tragic event. And therefore, as part of safeguarding policies, both in schools and in sports clubs, it could be something that is offered as a standard part of their toolbox.
Sir Neil Hudson.
My honourable friend makes a very powerful and sensible point, and I completely agree. This is about putting in measures to prevent crisis. And in many cases, and when I've met with the three dads, have heard discussions where schools have brought measures in after a catastrophe. So what we are talking about today is preventative healthcare medicine. So I totally agree with my honourable friend. And it is very important that this intervention in schools is done sensitively and very much, as we have heard today, in an age-appropriate way, in the curriculum, with guidance, and also we need to be thinking about how we do this for younger children. Now, Tim, one of the three dads, I was very struck when I met with you recently talking about some of the language that could be used and is being used for younger children. The concept that if you are sad and you don't want to be here, it's that sort of language that can actually address some of these issues in an age-appropriate and sensitive way. I also wanted just to briefly expand out of education into rural mental health. Now, Andy, as a constituent in Cumbria, will be very well aware of these issues that we face in rural areas. And this is something that's rooted in my personal and professional background with my experiences in the foot and mouth crisis. And in Cumbria and right across the UK, we are struggling now with the avian influenza outbreak. And the mental health impact that has on rural communities should not be understated. Now, we're doing an inquiry on the EFRA Select Committee, and one of the key issues that we have found is that, and this I think is why I wanted to bring this into this part of the debate, there's a common theme of a reluctance of people to seek help, to put their hand up and say, I'm struggling. And so very much that concept of being able to feel it's okay to not be okay. The devastation of animal outbreaks can be huge on farmers and rural communities. And as I've said, it can actually be ongoing as well. And the inquiry that we have instigated on the EFRA Select Committee, we will be producing a report in due course. But one of the key areas is talking about prevention. How can we help people in whatever walk of life, whether it's in schools, whether it's in education, whether it's in rural communities, whether it's in urban communities? How can we reach out and help people to help themselves? So the principles we are discussing today in educational settings, I think, have wider-ranging capabilities as well in society in terms of mental health first aid and putting in preventative measures so that we can prevent catastrophe. So finally, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, I pay tribute to the three dads walking for their fortitude and their determination, their gritty determination to keep going, campaigning on this vital issue. I thank them for all their work and all the charities that are assisting them. We can all work together right across the House, and I look forward to hearing from the government as to how we can put in place these preventative measures in schools and educational settings moving forwards. Thank you.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mrs Noakes. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I first of all start by thanking my honourable friend for Don Valley for having secured this incredibly important debate and widely his work on mental health, which he's been well known for since coming into this House. 17 people a day take their own lives in the UK, not just today, tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, and onwards. That's just a statistic, but just listening over the last hour and a half, we've heard many of the very personal, emotional, tragic stories of the individual people, the names of people who are behind that statistic. And I woke up this morning, Mrs Noakes, on Radio 4, listening to Mike, Andy and Tim from the three dads walking as I was getting ready and packing my bags to catch the train down to London. And I heard about Emily, Sophie and Beth as well. And it really did make it very, very personal. So thank you for coming along today. I also heard from them as well that the Education Secretary and the Prime Minister will be meeting them. And I look forward to hearing more about that. When I returned to Parliament in 2019, I pledged and wanted to do more around suicide prevention and mental health, having lost two close friends who took their own lives. And I'd just like to thank the Honourable Member for Blaydon for the work that we do together on the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Suicide Prevention and Self-Harm. And we had a very emotional meeting last week, actually, with James's Place, the Samaritans, and Mike McCarthy, who told us about his son Ross and his walk that they're going to be doing with the Baton of Hope. So lots of people are walking and raising awareness, and that's going to be in June of this year. And Mike, along with Steve Phillip, they lost their sons Ross and Jordan and I think they're going to be coming to Parliament as well. So having listened for an hour and a half, I mean, what can we do? I'm a dad to 2 teenage daughters, and I quite often think, in fact, I think almost every day, that I'd just like to turn off the toxicity, the pressures and the unreal expectations of social media. I really feel like I just want to switch it all off sometimes on their behalves. I also want to just erase the isolation, the disruption and anxiety that has been caused to young people of the pandemic. I don't think either of those 2 wishes are achievable or realistic. So what can we do? So in memory of Emily, Sophie, Beth, Sean and all the other young people we've heard about, I just want to say that we should all get behind the motion of this debate. Let's see how we can introduce suicide prevention and more support for mental health in the school curriculum, of course, in an age-appropriate way and in a very sensitive way. So we will do our bit here, hopefully, in Parliament, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister. And finally, Mrs Noakes, I just want to say to Mike, Andy and Tim, if you keep walking, we will keep talking. Thank you.
Stephen Morgan. Pleasure to serve with you in the chair, Ms Noakes, and I would like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Don Valley for tabling this important debate, and I would also like to pay tribute to Mike Palmer, Andy Airy and Tim Owen, who, as we've heard, raised over £1 million for suicide prevention charities, inspired 159,000 people to sign a petition that triggered this debate and brought the issue of suicide prevention in schools to the national consciousness. As other members have mentioned, the 3 dads came together following the deaths of their daughters Beth, Sophie and Emily, united by their grief and a shared motivation to tackle the causes of suicide. They have completed 2 heroically long-distance walks to raise money, awareness and campaign for suicide prevention to be included in the national curriculum. Last year, the trio spent a month walking 600 miles between the 4 parliaments of the UK to bring their campaign directly to politicians. So, poignantly, they said they are part of a club no one wants to be in, yet sadly they are always meeting new members. The strength of feeling that they have generated for their campaign has been shown in their backing for their petition received for this debate today. And I'm sure everyone here today would like to join me in saying thank you to them. I'd also like to pay tribute to the work done by other suicide prevention charities and campaigners who devote their lives to helping people who often feel that they have no one to turn to in their hour of need. Now, Ms Noakes, we have heard from a number of honourable members from across the House with helpful and insightful contributions and interventions, with stories from their own constituencies, personal experiences, and from liaison with our community's fantastic array of voluntary and community sector organisations. My honourable friend for Blaydon spoke with real insight and expertise in her capacity as chair of the APPG, shared helpful research in preventing suicide and the invaluable role of the charitable sector in supporting families and promoting mental well-being. My honourable friend for Wythenshawe and Sale spoke passionately about what is at stake if we don't act. And my honourable friend for York Central spoke with regards to the need to create safe spaces, both in communities and online, to prevent suicide and the support needed to give young people the skills to be resilient and gain the confidence to speak up and talk. Chair, I'd also like to thank my honourable friend for Oldham East and Saddleworth for bravely sharing her tragic story of Jack's life and the lessons that need to be learnt. And my honourable friend for Bristol East made helpful points about the need for supporting universities. And my honourable friend for Barnsley East set out the challenges that CAMS are currently facing, the consequences that is having in constituencies across the country. As we've heard tonight, while it's often not talked about, suicide is the biggest killer of the under-35s in the UK. Research has shown that women aged 16 to 24 are more likely to report having self-harmed than over any other age group, almost 20% reporting self-harm. Suicidal thoughts are almost more common amongst women aged 16 to 24. Over 200 school children were lost to suicide every year, each one of them a tragedy. Chair, a commitment was made in 2016 to reduce the rate of suicides in England by 10% by the year 2020. But by 2022, the rate was almost the same. More clearly needs to be done. Research shows that with appropriate early intervention and suicide support, young people, all of this could be prevented. It's therefore so important as a society that we make sure that those interventions are in place and support always is ready for use. We cannot bury our heads in the sand when it comes to these issues. Suicide needs to be discussed, even if it's uncomfortable. In recent years, progress has been made in ending the stigma around mental health. However, it's clear that there is so much more that needs to be done to ensure that mental health problems are given equal priority to physical health. Chair, as my honourable friend for Bristol East said, too many young people are struggling with their mental health. NHS data shows that 1 in 6 children now have a probable mental health condition in 2021, up from 1 in 9 in 2017. And they're struggling without support, unable to see a GP, stuck on child-adolescent mental health service waiting lists for years, left in limbo without help. Concerningly, a report by Schools Week last year found that suicidal children are being turned away by overstretched camp services, with schools instead told to keep them safe. The investigation also found that many mental health services are refusing to see children with a diagnosis for autism and other neurodevelopmental differences on the grounds that they do not meet the criteria for therapy. Families told the reporters that they are being left to keep children alive as they either wait or are rejected from support. Ms Noakes, no child should be left without the support that they need to be happy and healthy. No parent should be left feeling unsupported and alone when helping their child face mental health problems. No teacher should be left stuck, unable to refer children for the professional support that's needed. This is why we are committed to give children access to a professional mental health counsellor in every school. We'd also ensure that children are not stuck waiting for referrals, unable to get support. Teachers would not be expected to provide expert mental health services they aren't trained to deliver. We'd also ensure every child knows that help is at hand, and for the young people for whom accessing that support in school isn't the right choice, we will deliver a new model of open access mental health hubs in every community, building on work already underway in Birmingham, Manchester and elsewhere, providing an open door for all our young people, getting support to children early, preventing problems from escalating, and improving young people's mental health, not just responding when they're in crisis. Alongside this investment in children's mental health, Labour would see a radical expansion of the mental health workforce, resulting in over 1 million more people receiving support each year, setting a new NHS target ensuring that patients start receiving appropriate treatment, not simply initial assessment of needs within a month of referral. We would also review the current school curriculum, making sure young people are ready for work and ready for life. As we've heard today, it's important that we teach young people to understand their mental health, to be able to identify warning signs of deteriorating mental health and well-being, which could lead to self-harm or suicidal thoughts in themselves and in others. 1 in 4 people experience a mental health problem of some kind each year in England. 1 in 6 people report experiencing a common mental health problem like anxiety and depression in any given week in England. It is key that young people are struggling recognise that they aren't alone in this, that help is at hand, and that they know how to find it for themselves and for their friends. Ms Noakes, the Department for Education is committed to reviewing RSHE statutory guidance. So I would encourage all campaigners and experts and those listening to the debate today to submit their evidence to that process. Our schools and teachers must be equipped to talk about mental health problems and suicide prevention in a safe and age-appropriate way. This is something everyone across the political spectrum can agree on, and so it's crucially important that we get it right. As we've heard today, we should ensure that all reforms are evidence-based and done with children's well-being at their heart. So in conclusion, the highest priority for the Department for Education at all schools must be to protect children's safety and well-being. In his response, I hope the Minister will outline what his department is doing to help children who are struggling with their mental health get the support that they need. What his department is doing to bring down waiting times for children with mental health services needs. And what his department is doing to help prevent suicide amongst young people. I'd like to close my remarks by again thanking honourable members for their contributions and to the 159,000 people who signed the petition to trigger this important debate. Conversations about suicide prevention can only lead to increased support and more dialogue. It is key that nowhere is off limits for life-changing conversations, and I hope that any actions taken from today will ensure that more lives are saved. Thank you.
Minister. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be responding to this debate under your careful stewardship, Ms Noakes, albeit at the last few minutes of the debate. I'd like to start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Don Valley, on the way he opened this important debate. A debate with many deeply emotional testimonies from families who've lost loved ones to suicide, including in a moving speech from the honourable member for Oldfield East and Saddleworth. I'd also like to thank Andy Airy, Mike Palmer and Tim Owen for being here today and for their tireless effort to increase awareness of suicide prevention. Through their campaign, 3 Dads Walking, Andy, Mike and Tim took on the challenge of walking between all 4 parliaments, a 600-mile walk that has raised more than £1 million to support suicide prevention in memory of their daughters, Sophie, Beth and Emily. And through the campaign, Andy, Mike and Tim shared their personal stories of their kind, talented and much-loved daughters and the devastating impact that losing them has had on their parents, siblings, wider families and friends. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, has taken a keen interest in the campaign after she met Andy, Mike and Tim in 2022 when she served as Minister of State for Care and Mental Health. And I know that she's written to them recently and hopes to meet them again shortly. As Minister for Schools in 2020, I helped with the introduction of education on mental well-being through the relationship, sex and health education curriculum. And as my honourable friend for Anglesey said in her intervention, we do need to be able to talk about mental health. And while this is an important first step, I recognise the concerns raised through this petition and in this debate, and will do my best to address those concerns. Now, the death of any young person is tragic, and we need to do everything we can to prevent it. It's heartbreaking to think that some young people have suicidal thoughts and don't know how to address them. And it's heartbreaking that families have to go through the loss of a child with possibly no indication of their state of mind, as movingly pointed out by my honourable friend, the member for Chatham and Aylesford, in her speech and contribution to this debate. We know that going to school can, in and of itself, be a protective factor for many young people, and we want schools to be places where emerging issues are identified and supported early, and where pupils are taught to identify their own feelings and seek the right support at the right time. We need, as the honourable member for Wythenshawe and Sale East put it so well, we need to help young people back to the path of hope. Now, the statutory curriculum guidance for RSHE sets out the detailed content that pupils should be taught. They are taught about the building blocks needed to develop positive and safe relationships and good physical and mental health. The content includes how to recognise the early signs of mental well-being concerns, such as anxiety and depression. Pupils are taught where and how to seek support, including who in school they can speak to if they're worried about their own or someone else's mental well-being. And I hope this valuable knowledge will stay with children as they progress into adulthood, where they will continue to look out for friends and know how to seek the help that's needed when they or someone they know is struggling and not able to take the first step in supporting themselves. In addition to mental well-being, the health education curriculum provides content on the benefits of daily exercise, good nutrition and sufficient sleep, which can all have a positive impact on a young person's health and well-being. Making sure pupils understand the links between good physical and mental health will provide them with valuable tools for managing their emotions. We want schools to develop curriculum content that is helpful in the context of their pupils. Our approach is not to dictate how and when schools teach this, but make sure they recognise it must be covered in an age-appropriate and sensitive way, as my honourable friend, the member for Don Valley, said. The RSHE statutory guidance is clear that the subject of suicide and self-harm can be discussed as part of this topic, but it is important that teachers approach this very carefully, as we have to acknowledge that taught badly, it has the potential to do harm, and we need to consider the issues carefully before making it an absolute requirement. Now, we know that mental health awareness, as already covered by the curriculum, can have an impact on preventing suicide. We have been funding a large-scale randomised controlled trial of approaches to improving pupil mental well-being in schools. This trial will provide evidence on what works to support children's mental well-being and how it can be delivered in schools. The AWARE arm of the trial is testing approaches to mental health awareness teaching, including a school-based programme for young people aged 13 to 17 called Youth Aware of Mental Health, which has good international evidence of reducing suicidal ideation. This has the potential, Ms. Noakes, to add to the work that we have already done to improve teacher confidence and the quality of teaching by developing online training materials and implementation guides which give advice to schools and staff on how best to support pupils' mental and physical health. Now, the issue of social media came up during this debate. Teaching children to be safe online is another aspect of suicide prevention covered by the existing curriculum. Now, the inquest into the tragic suicides of Frankie Thomas and Molly Russell found that unsafe online content contributed to their deaths. And in Frankie's case, the failure of the school to support her in the online environment. As the Honourable Member for Barnsley East pointed out, life for this generation of teachers has changed beyond recognition compared to previous generations, and even generations as far back as mine, completely changed. Now, we know that social media can be a force for good in relation to mental health. It is part of life and relationships for young people, but for it to be helpful, we need to make sure that the online environment is as safe as possible, a concern also raised by social media. Now, through health education, we are equipping children and young people with the knowledge they need to use the internet and social media safely and understanding how to deal with the content that they'll encounter online. And in addition to the statutory health education content, we have published guidance for schools on teaching online safety. This guidance helps schools to deliver internet safety content in a coordinated and coherent way across their curriculum. Ms. Noakes, to check that RSHE teaching is having an effect, we're also monitoring its implementation. We want to test whether schools are implementing the requirements with sufficient quality and to understand what helps and hinders good teaching. And as announced by the Prime Minister last Wednesday, we have brought forward the review of the RSHE statutory guidance, which was originally due to commence in September 2023, the review that is. The current content I have already set out on mental health and well-being covers a large amount of what is important in suicide prevention, but we will look further at this as a priority area for the review and decide, I'll give way in one moment to the Honourable Lady, so we will look further at this as a priority area for the review and decide whether to add requirements on teaching about suicide. As part of taking a comprehensive, evidence-based approach, we will make sure we speak to the experts in this field, and we plan to start the review as soon as possible. I'll give way to the Honourable Member.
Yeah, I thank the Minister, and he said about testing whether the RHSE was having an effect by monitoring its implementation and sort of looking at what was actually being taught in schools and so on. But I wondered what steps were being taken to take it beyond that to see about outcomes, because it's one thing proving that children, perhaps, you know, being taught about the dangers of drugs, but unless there's actually an impact then on the number of children suffering drug-related harm or not getting involved in gangs or, in this case, you know, not going down that path. So how does that work in terms of judging whether it's actually having an impact as well as just judging whether it's being implemented?
Yes, the Honourable Member for Bristol East makes a very important point, and the review will be thorough, and it will not only talk to experts, it will, of course, look at all the data and evidence that we have through Ofsted and through other statistics to make sure that that review is a thorough review and leads to us having at the end of it an RSHE curriculum, a guidance document that is the most effective that it can be to deliver the aims and objectives of the RSHE curriculum. Now, Ms Noakes, yes, give way to my honourable friend.
Speaking to parents and loved ones of those who have also taken their life to suicide and hear their stories as to why this is something that they believe passionately should be on the curriculum.
Yes, I can give my honourable friend that assurance. I think debates like this are illuminating and helped by having those stories relayed during this debate, and they will also help, I'm sure, those carrying out the review into the RSHE curriculum. Now, teaching about mental health, of course, is only part of the issue. Schools can play a vital role by providing safe, calm and supportive environments that promote good mental well-being and help prevent the onset of mental illness. Now, we shouldn't, however, expect teachers to act as mental health experts, nor to make a mental health diagnosis. Education staff are well placed to observe children day to day, and many schools provide excellent targeted support for pupils with mental health issues. To help implement effective whole school or college approaches to mental health, we are funding all schools and colleges in England to train a senior mental health lead. Over 11,000 schools and colleges have already taken up this offer, including more than 6 in 10 state-funded secondary schools in England, and we have invested a further £10 million this year to ensure that up to 2/3 of state-funded schools and colleges can benefit by April this year. This is in addition to record funding for children and young people's mental health support through the NHS long-term plan, which commits to increasing investment in mental health services by at least £2.3 billion a year, putting mental health on a par with physical health, as my honourable friend, the member for Penrith and the Borders, has been campaigning for. Now, this means an additional 345,000 children and young people will be able to access NHS-funded mental health support by 2023-24. Now, a number of honourable members raised the issue of access to mental health services for young people. Despite significant extra funding, we know that too many young people have to wait for too long before they are seen by a mental health professional. Last year, the NHS set out their plans to introduce new access and waiting time standards for mental health services, and one of these standards is for children and young people to start to receive their care within 4 weeks from referral, but hopefully sooner than that. Now, as a result of the 2017 Children and Young People's Mental Health Green Paper, which is a very significant piece of work, more than 2.4 million children and young people now have access in schools and colleges to a mental health support team, which delivers evidence-based interventions for mild to moderate mental health issues, supports each school or college to introduce or develop their approach to promoting and supporting mental health, and advises and liaises with external specialist services to help children and young people to get the right support and to stay in education. The government has also... Yes, I give way for the Honourable Member.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I'm just looking at the petition organised by the Three Dads Walk, and it's really quite simple. There's some very important information that you've given us about mental health support in schools, but this is quite simple. It's about talking to young people about suicide prevention, knowing that it's okay for them to talk about their feelings. And I wonder whether the Minister can say how he'll be approaching that in the RHSE review specifically, that specific point.
The Honourable Member makes an important point, but that will be a matter for the review. This review needs to be carried out with thoroughness, with speed, but also we need to consult experts on this issue as well as, of course, talking to families and young people who've got important experience to convey to the to the review. So I wouldn't want to preempt that review with my own opinions. We want to make sure that this is a properly carried out review, and then we will get the best possible outcome from it, not just in this area, but across the whole of the RSHE curriculum. I'll give way to the Honourable Member.
I'd like to just raise two further points, if I may. One is about teacher training and ensuring that teachers, when they're going through their training, are getting the right training being put to them. And secondly, parents. Schools are part of a wider community, and obviously parents are part of that community. Knowing how to have those conversations with their children is really important. So I wonder how the review will look at a wider scope of being able to provide the support in the right place.
Well, I'll take both of those points on advisements. I mean, you're talking about some wider issues of parents. We're talking about really about a curriculum for schools. Of course, in due course, those children become parents and become adults and become parents. And teacher training, again, that's a wider issue, which, first of all, we need to get the curriculum right. And that's what will come out of this very thorough review of the whole RSHE guidance that we are starting right now. Now, Ms Noakes, the government has also committed to publishing a new national suicide prevention strategy for England this year. The strategy will reflect new evidence and national priorities for preventing suicides, and the Department for Education has worked closely with the Department for Health and Social Care throughout the development of the strategy to understand what more we can do to reduce suicide and self-harm amongst children and young people. And in answer to the question from the Honourable Member for Bristol East, the Department and the Department for Health is committed to publishing that strategy this year. So, Ms Noakes, in conclusion, the mental health of children is a priority for this government, and we know that schools can play a critical role in supporting children's mental well-being. We will monitor implementation of the new curriculum and continue to work to improve teacher confidence to deliver the broad-ranging and sensitive topics to the best of their ability, a point raised by the Honourable Member for York Central. We'll also continue the rollout of senior mental health lead training and mental health support teams to ensure that schools are getting the best support possible on pupil mental health. I've set out measures already in place and the ways in which schools can and do support pupils, including those with suicidal feelings. And once the review of the RSHE statutory guidance has concluded, we'll be able to consider what more can be done to support pupils further. Thank you.
Nick Fletcher to wind up.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. There's so many MPs that have spoken with many heartfelt speeches that there's too many to mention, but it is all extremely appreciated, and I'm sure the three dads will appreciate so many members of Parliament taking time out of their busy schedules to come here and discuss this such an important issue. I would like to specifically just mention the member from Bladen for the work that she does on this subject. I think it's so important, and it's wonderful to see that we have cross-party agreement on this. That's the way this place really gets things done. I would like to obviously thank the three dads, Andy, Tim and Mike. They've been on a journey that nobody would want to go on, but the deaths of your daughters, Sophie, Emily and Beth, has brought us all here together today, and with assurances from the Minister of what work's going to proceed, I'm hopeful that we can really get the number of young people taking their own lives down to zero. And when we see these numbers fall, it will be thanks to your work and in memory of your three precious daughters. It just leaves me to say thank you to the Petitions Committee for bringing all this work together. There's an awful lot happens behind the scenes, and I know Andy, Tim and Mike will appreciate the work that they've done also. I would like to thank Papyrus for the work that they've done and all the other charities that have been mentioned today, and it's been a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Ms Noakes, too. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 623390 relating to suicide prevention and the national curriculum. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order. The sitting stands adjourned.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.